in the mid-1980s, at the absolute height of her fame, the most cheerful woman in America sat alone in her bedroom, holding something no one would ever associate with Dolly Parton, asking God a question she never thought she'd ask. She had reached one of the darkest moments of her life. What interrupted it wasn't a friend, a doctor, or her husband. It was the sound of a small dog coming up the stairs. Dolly Parton was born in a one-room cabin, delivered by a doctor who was paid in cornmeal. She died a half-billionaire who'd mailed 300 million books to strangers' children. Between those two facts sits a life she spent 60 years making look easy. It wasn't. She just decided the world would never see the bill. Dolly Rebecca Parton arrived on January 19, 1946, in a cabin on the banks of the Little Pigeon River in Sevier County, Tennessee. The doctor who rode out to deliver her, Robert F. Thomas, went home with a sack of cornmeal for his trouble, because her father didn't have any money. Not a little money, none. That father was Robert Lee Parton, a sharecropper who married Dolly's mother in 1939, when he was 17 and she was 15. He couldn't read or write, and he never learned. Dolly was the fourth of his 12 children. By the time her mother, Avie Lee, turned 36, she'd given birth to all 12 of them. The family soon moved to a two-room cabin up on Locust Ridge with no electricity, no running water, and no indoor plumbing, and it stayed that way well into the 1950s. The kids slept 3 and 4 to a bed. There were no toys, so at 5 or 6, Dolly found a dried corn cob, wrapped it in a scrap of blanket, and carried it around as her baby. She sang to it. Then she wrote a song about it, Little Tiny Tasseltop, and her mother wrote the words down for her because Dolly couldn't yet. A little girl mothering a corn cob because she had nothing else. Decades later, that image would come back around in the cruelest way possible. Around the same age, she jumped a fence and landed on a broken mason jar. 3 toes on her right foot were nearly severed. A doctor was out of the question. So her father and brothers held her down on the table. Her mother packed the wounds with cornmeal to soak up the blood, poured kerosene over them as antiseptic, and sewed the toes back on with the same needle she used for quilts. Dolly was 6, maybe 7. She learned right there what her body was for, absorbing whatever happened to it without complaint, because complaining didn't buy a doctor. That lesson would nearly kill her 40 years later. When she was 9, her mother contracted spinal meningitis while pregnant. The baby, a boy named Larry, was born in July 1955 and lived 4 days. Dolly has said her mother had told her that this baby would be hers to help raise. So when he died, a 9-year-old felt like she'd lost her own child. Every song she'd ever sing about heartbreak had its first rehearsal in that cabin. And then there was the coat. Her mother stitched one from a box of donated rags and told her the story of Joseph and his coat of many colors while she sewed. Dolly wore it to school proud. The other children laughed at her, and she said they locked her in the coat closet. She'd later put that humiliation into one of the most beloved songs in country music. What she rarely said out loud was the other half of it. Poverty, she once explained, hurts less in the living than in the shame. A child who's been locked in a closet for being poor doesn't forget it. She just decides never to look poor again. Her escape route came through her mother's brother. Uncle Bill Owens was a working musician, and he handed her a guitar and started driving her to Knoxville. By age 10, she was a regular on Cass Walker's radio and television show, reportedly for $5 a week. At 12, she cut her first record, Puppy Love. At 13, she stood on the stage of the Grand Ole Opry. So far, this reads like a fairy tale. But the girl heading for Nashville was about to find out how hungry a fairy tale can get. In June 1964, Dolly became the first person in her family to graduate high school. She left for Nashville the next morning, 18 years old, with her dirty clothes in a paper bag. On her very first day in town, she was standing outside a laundromat called the Wishy Washy, when a 21-year-old asphalt contractor named Carl Dean drove past and stopped to talk. He'd be her husband for nearly 59 years. That was the good part of 1964. The rest of it was hunger. In those first months, she had so little money that she's admitted to walking hotel corridors at night, looking for room service trays people had left outside their doors, and eating whatever was still on them. A future icon of American abundance, picking at strangers' leftovers in a hallway, she married Carl on May 30th, 1966, in Ringgold, Georgia. The guest list was her mother, the preacher, and the preacher's wife. Carl went to exactly one industry event, a BMI dinner that same year, and afterwards he told her, "I'm not going to another one of them damn things." He kept that promise for the rest of his life. He became the ghost husband, so invisible that Loretta Lynn joked she'd never once laid eyes on him, and tabloids spent decades insisting he didn't exist at all. He did. He simply had no interest in being famous, which made him the rarest creature in Nashville. Meanwhile, a far more interested man was watching her. In 1967, Porter Wagoner, host of the biggest syndicated country show on television, hired her as his new girl singer. He put her in front of millions of viewers every week, produced her records, and sang duets with her. He was the controlling star maker. He'd made her in his mind, and what a man makes, a man owns. Every creative decision ran through him, her own songs, her own image, her own money. It was the platform of a lifetime and a cage at the same time, and she was already writing the key. In 1971, Coat of Many Colors turned her childhood shame into a hit. By 1974, she'd outgrown the show, and she knew Porter would never simply let her go. So she did something no lawyer could have done. She wrote him a song. It was a goodbye letter set to music, because she knew that if she said it out loud, he'd argue, but if she sang it, he'd have to listen. The song was "I Will Always Love You." One of the most popular wedding songs on earth, started life as a resignation letter to a boss who wouldn't let her quit. She said she wrote Jolene the very same night, and in 2020 she told the story of an old cassette turning up with both songs recorded back-to-back in a single session. Her deepest insecurity and her most agonizing professional breakup on one tape in one evening. Porter reportedly cried when he heard the song and agreed to let her go. Then he waited 5 years and sued her. Before that, though, came the phone call. Elvis Presley wanted to record "I Will Always Love You." For a country singer in the mid-1970s, that was like being handed the keys to the kingdom. The night before the session, Elvis's manager, Colonel Tom Parker, called with his standard terms. Elvis didn't record a song unless he got half the publishing. Dolly, the girl who'd eaten hotel leftovers, said no. She said she cried all night over it. She just turned down the biggest star in the world to protect a piece of paper. Nashville's gatekeepers thought she was a fool. Nashville's gatekeepers were about to learn how expensive underestimating her would be. On March 21, 1979, Porter Wagoner filed a $3 million breach of contract suit against her, claiming a share of her earnings for the rest of her life. The case settled out of court, and by her own account, she paid him roughly $1 million. The first million she ever made. The man who'd given her a platform sent her the invoice for it. Grim as that was, she framed it as the price of freedom, and she and Porter later made peace. She'd be at his bedside when he died. By then, she'd already stopped asking anyone's permission. She'd built the look, the towering hair, the sequins, the figure, on purpose, modeling it on a woman in Sevierville the locals called the town tramp. Because to a poor mountain girl, that woman was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. Dolly's famous line on the subject was that it costs a lot of money to look this cheap. That wasn't just a joke. It was a strategy. She dressed like the punchline so nobody would see her coming. While the industry laughed at the wigs, she was building the machine underneath them. In 1980, 9 to 5 made her a movie star. She was 34, on top of the world, and about to be knocked flat by her own body. In 1982, a tour was cancelled. The public explanation was vague. The reality was abdominal pain and bleeding so severe she couldn't perform. The diagnosis, when it came, was endometriosis, a disease where tissue grows where it shouldn't. And it had been grinding away at her for years. And here was the little girl from the kerosene table doing exactly what she'd been trained to do since age 6. She ignored it. She kept working. Her doctors told her to stop. She didn't. In 1984, she collapsed on stage in Indianapolis. That's where this story descends into the years she almost never talked about, and where the pistol comes in. But first, the empire. Because the astonishing thing is what she built next, on the far side of that darkness. In 1986, she opened Dollywood on a site near her childhood home in the Smokies. It would grow to draw roughly 3 million visitors a year, and she put the ragcoat behind glass there in a museum case, like a royal vestment. The scraps that got her locked in a closet are now a shrine. In 1992, the no she'd cried over for a whole night finally paid out. Whitney Houston recorded "I Will Always Love You" for The Bodyguard, and it became one of the biggest-selling singles ever recorded. Because Dolly had refused Colonel Parker's demand for half the publishing rights, the fortune generated by Whitney's version belonged to her. Years later, Dolly joked that she had made enough money from the song to buy Graceland. The young songwriter, Elvis's manager, had tried to make Surrender. Half her song had lived long enough to joke that the song could now buy Elvis's house. The hardest refusal of her career became one of its greatest rewards. In 1995, she launched something that looked, at first, like a small local charity. The Imagination Library mailed a free book every month to every child in Sevier County from birth to age 5. She started it, she has always said, for her father, the illiterate patriarch who could never read a word of the songs that made his daughter famous. By the time she died, the program had sent out more than 300 million books across several countries. The man who couldn't sign his own name is the reason millions of children learned to read. Her father died in 2000 and her mother in 2003. Dolly kept going. In 2020, when a pandemic shut down the world, she quietly gave $1 million to Vanderbilt University Medical Center. Months later, The research paper announcing the Moderna vaccine's results credited, among its funders, the Dolly Parton COVID-19 Research Fund. She didn't hold a press conference. She found out from the news like everybody else. Behind all of it, the discipline never stopped. She's admitted that when she travels, she sleeps in full makeup, in case there's a fire in the night, and she has to face strangers barefaced. The small pastel tattoos on her arms, the butterflies and ribbons, aren't a rebellion. She's explained that they cover keloid scars from her surgeries. Even her skin became part of the image she carefully constructed for the world. Then, in March 2025, Carl Dean died at 82. 58 years of marriage, and the ghost husband finally stepped out of the shadows one last time in an obituary. She's said she hadn't been paying attention to her own health while she was watching over him. Within months, her sister was asking fans to pray for her. Through 2025 and into 2026, the cancellations piled up. Kidney stones, immune and digestive trouble, dizziness, dehydration. In August 2026, she pulled out of an appearance at Dollywood because her doctor wouldn't let her travel. 10 days later, on Tuesday, August 25, 2026, she died in Nashville. She was 80. Her family said only that it had been a brief battle with cancer, and asked that instead of flowers, people give to the Imagination Library. What kind of cancer, they never said. Even at the very end, she kept the bill to herself. Which brings this story back to the bedroom and the gun. It started with that collapse in Indianapolis. Her doctors finally forced her to stop. And in 1984 or 1985, the exact date shifts depending on when she told it, she underwent a partial hysterectomy to treat the endometriosis. She was around 37. She and Carl had always assumed children would come. They'd tried. Now, the operation closed that door permanently. The little girl who'd once wrapped a corncob in a blanket and rocked it to sleep because she had nothing else to hold, was told, at 37, that she'd never hold a child of her own. She has described what followed as the darkest time of her life. And it didn't last a week. It lasted somewhere between 18 months and 2 years. She stopped eating properly, then started eating everything. She put on about 50 pounds. She drank more than she ever had. Then, in the middle of it, came what she's only ever called an affair of the heart. She's never named him and has never said it was physical, but she's been blunt that it just about killed her. Some of this, by her own admission, she hid even from Carl. She said there were nights she'd lie in bed with the covers pulled up, hoping she simply wouldn't wake up. And then there was the night she got the gun out. She sat with it in her lap, and by her own account, she wasn't arguing with herself. She was arguing with God about whether suicide was a sin he'd forgive. She was, in her words, considering it seriously. And at that moment, her little dog, a Boston Terrier named Popeye, came running up the stairs. She said the sound of his paws broke the trance. She put the gun away. She's called that dog a messenger from God. In some later tellings, she frames the whole ordeal as God knocking her down so she'd finally sit still and listen. Whatever the explanation, the woman who'd spent a lifetime absorbing pain without a doctor had almost absorbed the last of it in silence. The world, of course, saw none of this. It saw a sequined smile, a joke about her figure, a new movie. It took her the better part of 2 decades to speak about that night in public. But here's the final turn of the screw, the part she'd have called grace. After the hysterectomy took her own children away, She said she came to believe God had a different plan. She put it like this: now everybody's kids could be mine. 10 years after the gun, she started mailing books to other people's babies. 300 million of them so far. The Imagination Library, the greatest single act of her life, was built out of the exact wound that nearly ended it. So was the smile, the truth she chose, or the disguise she couldn't stop wearing. Thanks for watching History's Hidden Lives. If you love uncovering the stories history tried to bury, hit like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one.